Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited to talk with the author of the May 2025 Aviatrix Book Club discussion book, American Flygirl. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the literary aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Susan Tate Ankeny, welcome.
Hi, Liz. Thank you for having me today.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I think you saw the article that I wrote for WWII magazine last quarter, just talking about how I was really longing for a book about this character in our history, and you brought it to us, and I cannot wait to get into the weeds on how you came to it. But before I do, I'd love to hear about you and your background. Tell us about you.
Okay, well, I was a teacher for many years before I went back to my first love, which is writing. I was studying writing in college, and then I got kind of scared off by journalism and went into education at my dad's urging. My dad was an educator. So I started writing about 15 years ago, actually, and that's when I was writing my first book. So it's a little unusual at my age to start, and it wasn't easy because, well, I didn't have a platform, and who was I? And I was writing nonfiction. So I wrote that book, and that was fantastic. And then this next book about Hazel, American Flygirl, was really a gift that was given to me. I was asked to write it by a publisher. So lucky me.
Okay, well, based on that, tell us a little bit more about that first book.
The first book, The Girl and the Bombardier, was a story. Initially, it was about my father, who was shot down over France in 44 behind Nazi occupied lines and was rescued by members of the French resistance and ushered and guided and hidden across the country, posing as a French person.
Wow.
But when I went to France, was invited to France by these people who'd saved him and went on my dad's path, I realized, well, I think I knew this before because I'd grown up with their stories, but I realized the story was about them, that this was a bigger story about these people, farmers and people without resources who risked their lives, the lives of their young children and their families to save these aviators and get them back to England. So, the war could have them dropping bombs again, as they said.
Right.
So I was so lucky. And that was the highlight of my life, to have that trip and be able to see all the places he was hidden by the people who were still alive. My father was gone, but they were still alive. And some of the places hadn't changed much. This is out in, the Picardy region, northern France, very rural.
Oh, that's fascinating. Did he have a diary or something that he kept that you drew from to know where to go?
First of all, well, I had all of their letters. They wrote to him all of their lives. So I knew Gottlieb was like a family of the friend, a friend of the family. And that's the woman that first saw him and hid him at her family's home first. So I knew of them.
Okay.
Um, and yes, he wrote extensively about what happened. He spoke about what happened in public, but he also told me when I was really young, I mean, maybe too young to hear these stories. He started telling me and he'd cry. So I grew up with it and really took it for granted. And that's where my love of aviation comes from. My father, he was a bombardier.
Oh, wow. So you love aviation. Are you an aviator?
I wish. I'm really flirting with the idea.
Oh, fun.
Yes, I would love to take lessons, and I've looked into it. I love airplanes. I did fly in a B-17 in the nose where my dad was stationed, and I love flying.
Oh, well, sister, on behalf of all of the Aviatrix Book Club members and all of my fans, we welcome you to the community. Go out there and get a discovery flight and get it going. And you're not the first author that I've talked to who is not a pilot, but who is dabbling in it now. So I'm excited to see how that plays out for you. And we're here to encourage you.
It's a dream.
Good. Well, make it happen. So can you give us a summary of the book for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it? And if you're interested in doing a reading, we'd love to hear that.
Yes, I can. American Flygirl is the biography of Hazel Ying Lee, who was the first Asian American woman to get a pilot's license in the United States. And she held several other firsts too, as being the first Asian American woman to fly with the military, to be trained for combat, to fly fighter aircraft. So she was a trailblazer of her time. And this story is about Hazel's life and training to fly in China. When she was in Portland, she was trained to be a dogfighter in China. So that's kind of an early chapter of her life. And then later, she became a member of the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service Pilots. So I would be happy to read a short excerpt. This is from chapter 10, which is called Engineers, Housewives, and Rockettes. And this is when all of the women that are going to be training to be WASP came together in Sweetwater, Texas, and they came from all over the country. I will begin. The Bluebonnet Hotel's lobby echoed with excited female voices from all over the country. The trainees came from cities and farms, New York City high-rises, and North Dakota soddies. Many of the women had never been more than 30 or 40 miles from the towns where they'd been born and raised. Some were married with children, and some were engineers. Most had been to college. There was a professional golfer, a professional skier, and a rocket dancer from New York City. A more varied group of women may have never been assembled. What they all had in common was the desire to fly. They were members of a small elite group of licensed female pilots who had been chosen to be part of an experimental program that might put the first women pilots in the military. The women beamed at one another with a sense of shared pride and empowerment. Each of them felt that having become a pilot, she could do anything. For the first time in their lives, they were surrounded by other women who could talk about flying and airplanes and who loved flying with an equal passion. The women met in one another's rooms that first night at the hotel like girls at a sleepover, sizing one another up and trying to determine who among them was the hottest pilot. Hazel had clout right from the start. Her experience in China, flying commercial aircraft, and witnessing bombings and dogfights mesmerized the others. And her extroverted personality, outgoing sense of humor, and confident style drew people to her. She delivered deep-voiced, playful comments that sent the others into fits of laughter. They had never met anyone like Hazel, who looked so different from the rest of them and yet made friends so easily.
Oh, that's such a great character sketch of her. That was perfect. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that the publisher was the one who brought this story to you. Tell me about this. How did you come to Hazel?
Miraculously, it really felt like a miraculous thing. I remember where I was walking my dog when I got the call from my agent, who always calls from a city street in New York City. So it's loud, and she doesn't waste time with hello and goodbyes. She's just like, Susan, got an idea. And a friend of hers, I think who she'd worked with, Wendy McCurdy, is the editorial director at Kensington Publishing.
Okay.
And they were having lunch and talking about Hazel Ying Lee and what a great story it would make. And my agent said, I have just the girl for you. So I was really lucky. And she said they really didn't know much about her other than there wasn't a book, and how her stories seemed forgotten. And yet she did all these incredible things.
Right.
And so my agent said on that Friday afternoon, take the evening and see what's available. How much is there enough material for a book? And so I spent the next hours, just diving into Hazel. And the first thing I found was that picture on the book cover. And I just fell in love.
Me too. Yeah. Me too.
And I was like, oh yeah, immediately I have to write her and I write about her, and kind of started talking to her, you know.
So great.
I was really just lucky to get that. And I hope more people write about her.
Oh, me too.
There's a children's book, but this is the only adult book about
Yeah.
Hazel. So
With the exception of Kay Gott's book, which I'm sure get to at some point when we talk about your research
I
for
have
this.
it.
Yeah, because I can't figure out how to get it, so I might have to borrow your copy. But no, this is so exciting that this story is out there, and I shared in that article that I wrote how I was really longing for more. So you mentioned there's one book. There are actually two. I mean, Sally Dang's book. I don't remember. I think it's the World War II Wasp or something like that. I'll put the titles in the comments. But the two children's books really left me wanting to know more about her, and I knew of her, but like I really wanted her to be fleshed out. And I also mentioned in that article that you portrayed her exactly how I imagined her from the picture. She is like a confident, fun loving, just a wonderful, like I told you, it's like she's like my new best friend. She joins the legions of new friends that I have in my brain from our history, through reading our books. And so I'm so excited about this. So get into like how you went about it. You mentioned you went online and you figured out that there was enough to get started. So how did you go about telling the story?
Well, the first thing I did was gather everything I could. I just cast a wide net and didn't honestly have a lot of time to write the book, which in some ways now when I look back, I think was great. I mean, my contract wanted the book delivered in 9 months. Yeah, I didn't even know if that was possible. Naive,
Right.
kind of stupid, thinking, sure, I'll, hope I can do that. So I was speeding through things. And one of my regrets, the only regret really about speeding through it, because I think there were a lot of really great things about staying immersed in the story like that. And that's all I did. So I didn't
Yeah.
come back to it and go, now, where was I? And did Hazel do that before? I was really in it all the time. But I do regret that I had a visa to go to China. And this was right before my visa was right before the pandemic started. My daughter was living there. And so we were not, in fact, our visas were revoked in February of 20. So I didn't get to go. And this is a year or so later, but things were still difficult enough that I didn't think I would be able to get to China. That's my only regret. And I hope to do that actually before I write another book that is probably going to take place in China. I want to go and see all of those things. So yeah, so I spent 3 months just gathering every single thing, every stone I could unturn, across the country and the world, and really came up with a lot. I mean, everything is in the book. There isn't anything that was left out. There was just enough, I believed, and family members and interviews, and there was just so much to draw from. I spent hours every day just reading letters written by wasps and mentioning Hazel. So I couldn't not read them. I was always picking out something that had happened to Hazel. And that's really how the story came mostly, is from their letters. I, Without them, I don't think there would have been a book. And Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas, has all of those archives. They have oral histories, but they have all of the letters. And back in that day and age, these women wrote home almost every day. Her roommate, Madge Rutherford, wrote home daily. I knew what Hazel was eating. I knew what pranks she had pulled, right from these letters. Without that, there maybe it would have been a story, but I don't think it would have been as rich and felt as present, as
Right.
immersive. It just that was a wonderful thing.
Oh my goodness, you're hitting on a point that I have written in my most recent article for WAI that'll come out in a couple of months. And it is this. I'm encouraging people who are on their journeys right now to keep a journal because, like the ways in which you were able to dive into, letters and diaries of our women Air Force service pilots to write this story, even if they don't intend to publish their own stories in the future, they'll have that as a record. And the way that we communicate now, I feel like things will be lost in the ether if we don't have them in a physical place that we keep. So
And
that's a
in the
message.
present, I love
Yeah,
that idea about journaling, but in the present, I've been talking to Vietnam nurses.
right.
One of them said to me recently, I was, just trying to find out what she did initially, and she said, "Oh, I didn't do anything worthwhile."
Oh, I know. I hear this all the time. And then you get them talking and you're like,
Yeah. So it to talking about what happened today in the moment that you might not think is
right,
real because you're in it. And
right.
years from now, that might be somebody's story that they're so grateful to have.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's just your grandchildren or your children, but also for posterity. I mean, when we are in a job that, we've been trained to do and we think is like our everyday routine, it can still be extraordinary to somebody else.
Mhm.
The way that you are a professional writer is an inspiration to other people who aspire to write. And so, yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that for sure. So let's talk about some of the highlights. What are some of the favorite things that you found out about Hazel?
There were so many things that were surprises as I was going through the research, and I'd be just giddy about it. The whole flying school, which that Hazel went to in Portland,
Right.
from Portland. I mean, I live in the area, and Hazel, so she was a Portland girl like I was, and I knew nothing about this flying school that trained Asian Americans from Chinatown to go to China and fight dog fights against the invading Japanese, which seems a pretty significant historical thing. The United States ultimately sent 200 flyers from all the China from 5 Chinatowns around the country, and Hazel was one of those, and that
Wow.
she was trained to dogfight. The things I knew about her were that she was an early pilot, first Asian American pilot, woman pilot, flew with the military, not in the military, but with the military. I knew those kinds of things, but that she was trained in Portland in a school with a bunch of other Asian American boys, all of them, this training was free, and
Mhm.
they would never have had that opportunity. Hazel's life would have been completely different with not only without that school, but also without Al Greenwood, who was another surprise to me. A man in that day and age who would take on a woman to fly was extremely unusual. Men were afraid of women in airplanes at that time.
Yeah.
No one wanted to teach a woman to fly because they might go berserk, was the thinking of the day. If a woman was off
Right.
the ground, she's so sentimental, temperamental, that she would just lose her senses and crash the plane. I
Right.
could never get tired of that. And Howard was not that way, and he was only a few years older than Hazel. So he became an advocate for women flyers, and Asian Americans in our country who were, looked down on. And he was quoted in the Oregonian often saying what great flyers they make. He just became this advocate for them. It was really an amazing man that very little is known about. He kind of disappeared.
Well, he had such a huge impact, and that just goes to show you the impact that one person can have, like, and the ripple effects that that has. And I thought that that was super fascinating. I had read about her. I don't remember in those children's books for sure, or even in online searches about her that the reason she learned to fly was to go and defend her ancestral home. Like I didn't know that, and I think that's just like never mind just the wasp part of her story. That right there is so incredibly courageous, you
That's
know?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she went to China. They were and she went there with the intent to join whatever service that they had flying in support of their defense at the time, but they weren't ready for her. And so she was given a ground job and was flying commercially, right?
She was commissioned, as all of them were, as officers.
Right.
The 32 flyers that came from Portland were
Hmm.
commissioned as officers and regarded as the best flyers that the Chinese Air Force had at that time. That another surprising fact is these people trained in Portland by Al Greenwood were the best China had. And yeah, when she got there, they said, no way, a woman can't fly. So she was given a job in the aeronautical library for a while, continuing to try and fly. She was commissioned as an officer and did end up part time, went up to Nanjing and flew commercially for a short time. But the Japanese were really heavily in that area. The murder, the Nanjing thing was about to happen. And so she got out right before that. So she flew a little bit commercially, but after that, she ended up as a security guard at at the gate outside the airbase.
Yeah. And then she came back to the States and was knocking around in New York when she saw the ad for the Wasp, right?
Yes. Yeah. She was a war refugee for a while before she was able to make it back, and
Oh,
actually got a job in China before she came back because she wanted to help. She wanted to help the Chinese war effort, and she wanted to help the American war effort, which, she saw the Japanese in the sky over her head and knew what they were capable of. And Pearl Harbor didn't surprise her at all. So after
Right.
Pearl Harbor happened, she thought, well, they're going to need me now. The US Air Force is going to need pilots. And
Right.
of course, no, they refused her. So yes, Jackie Cochran put an ad in magazines asking women who were already pilots to join her training program, which would train a group of women that would become the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service Pilots.
That's right. And so, what along the journey, what else surprised you, or what else did you want to highlight?
Oh, so so many things surprised me. The discrimination that she did and didn't experience really surprised me. And how she handled it. She
Right.
seemed to be unfazed by it. Now, whether or not she was, I really can't say. I would imagine it was lonely at times and it was difficult. And she used humor, I thought, very successfully to get through it, like being asked if she tanned. And she said, I was born with a tan. But
Right.
later she went back and showed them that her skin would tan.
Yeah.
She just had to deal with so many things that we wouldn't think of, and the
Mhm.
way she handled that, and the curiosity of people around her. Instead of being, their parents weren't real thrilled about their daughters making friends with the Chinese American, but they were so curious about her. And of course, these are daring women. They've gone a long way from home just so they can fly, but they loved her. They were curious. They ate Chinese food for the first time. They listened to her speaking Cantonese, and no one, it seemed, put her down or made fun of her or judged her among the WASPs. And
Right.
that surprised me. They learned from her, and I think she was a role model.
I was surprised by that too, that she didn't encounter, or there was no maybe record of her having to deal with that within the ranks of the WASP, which is wonderful.
Right. Well, it says a lot about the WASPs, and also, the time. And these women were really coming into their own. It was a big historical time for women. A lot of these women had never been out of their little hometowns, maybe in North Dakota where they were born. And now they're all thrown together. It was a very unique and different experience, and that they embraced it instead of being afraid and judgmental of what they didn't know. It was interesting to me.
Yeah. So she was a very accomplished pilot in this group. I mean, she was flying the fighters and those kinds of things. And I don't think it's a spoiler to announce that she passed away in the service. There was one thing. So as this is a biography, and there was one question I had. You were able to kind of describe what happened during her accident, and like from her perspective. And I know that she lived a couple of days after the accident. Where did that come from?
Well, she was conscious and in
Right.
terrible pain, but she
Right.
was able to speak about what her experience and what had happened. And of course, the WASPs were there with her. I mean, there were a group of maybe 10, because they'd all brought this shipment. I think there were about 60 airplanes that they were delivering. So most of those 60 were WASPs. So they saw the crash. And of course, I had all of that written in their account.
Right.
I mean, and it's in Kay Gott's book, all of their different stories of what they saw when she crashed. And they were never questioned by the government. They all stood right there on the flight line, and they were not a part of the final report. So that, and I did use the final report as well, because there were a lot of things that were the same. And then the stories of the women who visited her afterwards, and what she had said.
Tell us about Kay Gott and like how they came together and
This shipment of planes were coming from Niagara right off the factory, and it was November, and so they were heading for Montana, Great Falls, and the weather was terrible. They even had a hard time taking off from Niagara. They ended up taking off in groups and landing separately, and they'd get stuck in little towns. Like, I think they were in Fargo for a week because they couldn't take off, which is, of course, what caused the accident ultimately. But along that trip, I believe they were rooming together, but they met one evening bowling, because there wasn't anything to do. They didn't have anything to do in these places. And it was a very auspicious meeting because, Kay knew who she was, but they spent this evening together. And apparently Hazel talked about her entire life, and Kay wrote that down. And she says in her book, I mean, it's a very thin little book and it's mostly pictures. And it's just then the conversation that she had with Hazel that night. But um, she said Kay said she so impressed me that I felt like that meeting, was providential, and then I had to tell her story because I knew all of these things about her. And then of course Kay saw the crash happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how fortunate are we that she chose to document that for you, for us, for
Right
you
for
to
me.
draw from. Yeah, just for you. Amazing. In parallel to Hazel's story, we have the relationships with her brother and with her ultimately husband, who were both deployed. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there isn't a lot of information about her brother because he was drafted, I believe, I want to say 41, but she was already training for the WASPs, and they had not been together for a very long time because she'd been in
Right.
China for 8 years, I believe, and she'd been in New York for another 3 or 4. So her family, most of her family, some were in China, the rest were still back in Portland. And so, yes, he was drafted and ended up over in France and was killed. This is after D-Day, of course, November, going toward Germany. Battle of the Bulge just about to happen, and he was killed 2 days after Hazel.
Right. And then her husband, the man that she married, they had met in Portland.
Yes.
And did he go to China with her at the same time? I can't remember.
They were
Yeah.
trained, that entire class went to China, and he was a year younger than Hazel. I think he was 18 and she was 19 when they were doing it's about a 6-month training course before they sent them to China. And they both went together, and she was actually dating someone else for a while in that group, but they had a very special bond, a special friendship. She went out of her way in China to find out where he was and to be with him, and a romance kind of developed there, but it was 10 years before they would marry, and unfortunately just a little over 6 weeks before she died.
That's insane. But he survived for a long time. And who did I was something was very remarkable about who he ended up marrying or what he ended up doing. Remind me?
Well, he ended up becoming a general in the Chinese Air Force, but of course, he had stayed there when Hazel came back to the United
That's right.
States. He was working his way up. He was even the private pilot for General Kai-shek. I mean, he was very well known, very, high up in the ranks. And after Hazel died, he spent a year in reclusion. There was some situation between him and
Mm,
Hazel's family. They were not happy that he remarried, but he didn't remarry right away. And he was completely reclusive in China for a year. And then he did remarry and had children. And I
mm.
believe I don't think he's still alive, but he was in South Korea or that area still. He spent his whole life in Asia.
That's fascinating. So, one of the things that you dispelled in the book that I had heard and have actually repeated was that Hazel and her brother were denied burial in the local cemetery because they were Chinese. But you actually addressed that head on in the book that that was not an issue, right? You weren't able to find any actual evidence of this.
Well, it was an issue, and it was difficult for me because I wanted the facts. I wanted to be sensitive to the family and what had happened. And it's a little bit complicated. And
Right.
stories got changed over time. Nobody was lying about anything, but
Right.
one of the major things that didn't add up is that it was said that one of her sisters had written to the president asking for Hazel's permission for her to be buried at Riverview in Portland. But she was buried within a week of her death. She was buried 3 days after she arrived back in Portland. And there's also rumors that they couldn't find her family and her body went unclaimed for a year. And none of that's true. And also, I
Okay.
spent time, of course, with Riverview and working with the people there. There are other Chinese Americans buried there before Hazel. One of the issues, the biggest issue, well, there were several. Her brother would have been buried up in our military Willamette National Cemetery. Hazel would not,
Right.
because she wasn't technically a part of the cemetery of the military. So Hazel and
Right.
Victor are buried together. So yes, she would not have been permitted to be buried at Willamette, and that might have been what was really going on at the time.
Right.
But no, she was not turned down from Riverview because she was Asian American. And the people were there really nice working with me. And, we dug through stuff to try and find out. There's actually another Hazel Ying Lee buried there just a few years before Hazel. So anyway,
Oh,
a little
yeah,
aside.
that's confusing.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's difficult. And the family did not carry on a lot of history about Hazel. They didn't talk about her after she died. And so
Hmm.
it was very difficult. Her niece that I talked to didn't know what had happened. Um,
Oh, wow.
didn't really know about Hazel other than that she had died. And after she died, the family agreed to not talk about her anymore.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's unfortunate because obviously I'm a huge proponent of telling these stories so that we can keep the history alive, but also what an inspiration she is, you know?
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate that they weren't interested in kind of promoting that history. Were there any questions that you weren't able to answer in your research that you wish you could? Or what was the hardest part about this research for this book?
China. Everything that happened in China, because
Right.
they were being invaded. So there was not much written, of course, during that time. I mean, they were literally being bombed. Hazel barely got out of Canton with her life on that Easter Sunday when Japan decimated Canton, and that's when she became a war refugee. So there there aren't letters home. The country has been shut off.
Right.
So I wish I had known more. I don't know if going there would have really helped that, because when you're being invaded, you're not keeping track historically. You're trying to survive. So I wish there had been more about her time there, because she was there quite a while. And of course, her friend Virginia died there of malaria. And then Hazel was really alone. That was her only woman friend that was also a pilot. Yes.
So now that this book is out there, that you're invited to write it and it's been published, what do you hope it accomplishes?
Oh, so many things. Too many things to put on a little book. Um, I think in a larger sense, we see in Hazel's story that people of any gender or ethnicity can contribute to the protection and betterment of our country. And the way she persisted in a peaceful way, relentless determination, I think, is very inspiring. It's very inspiring to me right now, what she was able to accomplish and how she never backed down. I mean, I just think her story is extremely inspiring.
I think one of the things it demonstrates is a point that I hear people talk about um, being so overwhelmingly surprised when women want to defend their countries. And here we have a woman who not only defended, our country, but also traveled across the world to go to her homeland and defend it. So it's absurd to think that women aren't programmed to want us to protect and defend our countries. It's just a ridiculous thought. And of course, it's sort of some of the rhetoric that's tossing around right now in the world. So yeah. So it's wonderful to have examples like Hazel, and we're so grateful for you recording this history also at a time when our histories are being erased from government
Mhm.
websites. And what I like to say is
Yes.
that you cannot erase a book. The history is there. And if we have to ship our books overseas to protect them, we will. But the history isn't going away. And so thank you so much for your work that you did to preserve that. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about Hazel and her story?
It's hard to pick one thing, but she inspires me every day. She still inspires me every single day to do difficult things as a woman. Now I face age discrimination as well as gender discrimination.
Hmm.
And I think of her. I think of when somebody, I mean, regularly tells me I'm too old indirectly to do something. I think of her. I think of her that we aren't limited, and we don't have to let other people limit us. We don't have to buy into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I could, if you get me started, I could just go on and on about this whole topic of what a trailblazer she was for women. I'm so grateful for her and her story.
Well, we'll have to have everybody read the book to be just as inspired as you are and as I am by her story. Um, so you mentioned maybe that you might be working on some other things. Do you have anything in the works now that you're working on now? You said China.
I do. Yes. There's several things. I haven't narrowed it down yet. It's intimidating to pick when I feel like I have six great
Oh,
topics.
wow.
The China story is about, there was only one nurse with the flying tigers in China, and her husband actually was a flying tiger too. Emma Foster. Oh, she had so many last names. Petach. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that correctly, but her story of being in China and Burma during the war, extreme, primitive circumstances. And her husband died while she was pregnant with their child. And she was the only woman over there. And she was nursing. So she was seeing things that she didn't even have any idea how to handle, that she'd had no training for.
Right.
Her story is very interesting. And several others. The first Native American woman to earn a pilot's license also was trained in Portland, and from Willapa Bay, which is about 2 hours from me on the Washington coast. And her story is interesting, and how she leaned into the stereotype of being a Native American to bring awareness. So she called herself Princess something, Kuzdacha, and wore full tribal while she was doing piloting stunts to bring aware. So, she was using a stereotype to bring attention to the fact that she was Native American. And she was just, a bigger than life personality like Hazel. And it was kind of the same era, but I think her story, one of her ancestors was the whaler Captain Starbuck, who Starbucks is named after. So,
Susan, you have to
you know,
write that story now. I'm sorry. You better put that high on the list
I
there.
so first, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, in our correspondence preceding our interview, you asked me, based on the fact that I had said, I was really longing for a book about Hazel. You asked me if there were any other people that I was wishing for a book for, and I don't have a name at the ready. But now you've given me one with this wonderful character, this Indian woman. I cannot wait to read about her and talk to you again when that book comes out. But in terms of groups of women, the thing that we lack is a lot of content featuring our aircraft mechanics maintainers, and I just would love to see a rich history of either one specific character or an anthology, a collection of stories about them, whether that comes to you in terms of inspiration or whether somebody out there listening is looking for inspiration. That's what we need some more of, because for whatever reason, our aircraft mechanics are not as prolific writers as our women pilots are, and we need more of those role models out there.
That is such a great idea, which I didn't even think of. And one of the women in my six, Willa Brown, who
Yeah,
was the first African American woman she was also the first African American woman to get a mechanic's
that's right.
license.
Yep.
So kind of broadens
Yeah,
that.
actually, so we really we celebrated Willa Brown and Janet Harmon Bragg during their inductions in the Women in Aviation International Pioneer Hall of Fame at WAI 2025. And that nomination, by the way, was inspired by a book written by Elizabeth Wein and Cherie L. Smith, American Wings, which is about the pioneering aviators of Chicago. And the race for equality of the sky in the sky is part of the subtitle there. And it was because they wrote that book that I dug into the Hall of Fame to see if they were in there and then asked them to nominate her. I know that Hazel is in there, but maybe, and I don't know if this Indian woman is, but we'll go search it out. But yeah, I would, and Willa, long before this this book American Wings came out, Willa is the inspiration for my the character in my book who is a mechanic. She has her dog is named Willa after Willa Brown. So yeah, I'm super excited for more on her. So yeah, if you can get to that story as well, we'd appreciate it.
I get on that right now today.
Thank you.
They're all such good stories. I think I'll try to do all of them.
Well, yeah, you have your work cut out for you, and we'll just wait patiently, and then we'll read them and discuss them and interview you about them. Thank you for your service. Well, this has been incredible. I want to shift into talking a little bit more about writing and publishing, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all of us, and probably on behalf of some young Asian women who will be inspired by her as well, to know that this is something that this woman very bravely did in her life. So I think it's a wonderful book. And can you remind us where we can find you and where we can find it?
Oh, yes. My website is susentateankeny.com, and you'll find lots of resources and things there about that. Most local bookstores have the book. Amazon, I know how we all have feelings about Amazon, but
and bookshop.org, and you can go to my website and you can find the book through a link on my website for bookshop.org if you want to support your local bookstore.
That's perfect. Thank you. I mean, we're on opposite coasts, so if I say Powell's or Broadway
but bookshop.org, you can select your own. This is just like a little education public service announcement for my audience. At bookshop.org, you can select your local bookstore to get the profits from the sale of the book. So
perfect. What a great idea.
It is great. And I know that your book is there, so I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Susan. I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to talk about all these books you have coming up.
Thank you.